In the small village of Eldridge Hollow, nestled deep in the folds of the Appalachian Hills, where the mist clung to the pines like an old regret, there lived a woman named Clara Hensley. The year was 1947 when she first came into the world, born in a clapboard house with a tin roof that sang in the rain, the third child of a coal miner whose lungs were already turning black from the dust below. Her mother, exhausted from birthing and scrubbing and keeping the fire alive, looked down at the tiny girl with eyes too tired to hope for much. Clara cried softly, as if she already understood that the world she had entered was not generous with its favors. The village was no more than a scattering of homes along a dirt road that turned to mud in spring and froze hard in winter. Everybody knew everybody else's sorrows before they knew their own. The men worked the mines or logged the high ridges. The women kept gardens, canned what little grew, and raised children who would one day do the same. Life moved slowly, measured in church bells on Sunday and the distant whistle of the coal train at dusk. In such a place, marriage was not romance, it was survival. A woman without a husband was a burden on her father first, then her brothers, and finally on whatever charity the church could spare. To remain unmarried past 25 was to invite whispers that grew louder with each passing year. Clara grew tall and thin, with dark hair that fell straight to her waist and eyes the color of riverstone after rain. She was not beautiful in the way that turned heads. Her face was too sharp, her mouth too serious. But there was something quiet and watchful about her that made people uneasy, as if she saw further into them than they wished. At school she learned quickly, finishing her books while others struggled with the letters. The teacher once said she had a mind like a steel trap, but in Eldridge Hollow that was not a compliment for a girl. Minds like that were for men who might leave the mines one day. Girls were meant to be useful, not clever. When Clara was 16, her father came home from the mine coughing blood into a rag. 3 months later, he was dead, buried in the hillside cemetery beside two brothers who had gone the same way. Her older brother Tom took his place underground, and her younger brother Eli was sent to live with an aunt in Knoxville because there wasn't enough food. Clara stayed to help her mother, washing clothes for the mine foreman's wife, tending the garden, milking the one cow they still owned. She spoke little, worked long, and kept her thoughts folded tight inside her. By 19, the first proposals began. Not grand declarations, but practical arrangements spoken over coffee on the porch. Harlan Whitaker, a widower twice her age with 4 children and a farm that needed hands, asked her mother if Clara might consider becoming his wife. Her mother looked hopeful for the first time in years. Clara listened from the kitchen doorway, then said no, quietly, firmly. Harlan shrugged and found another girl from 2 valleys over. The whispers started then. Proud, they said. Too proud. Next came Raymond Cole, 24 and already missing 2 fingers from a slate fall. He had a steady job and a house his father left him. He courted her properly, brought a jar of wild honey, fixed the loose step on their porch. Clara walked with him once along the creek, listening while he talked about the land he would clear, the children he wanted. When he asked, she looked at the water rushing over the stones and said she wasn't ready. Raymond's face hardened. He married a girl from the church choir 6 months later. People began to say Clara thought herself better than the rest of them. One by one, the eligible men tried. Some out of genuine feeling, most out of need. Each time Clara refused. Not with anger or scorn, but with the same quiet no that left no room for argument. By 23, she had turned down every man in the village who could offer a home. The older women shook their heads at her mother. She end up alone, they said. And then who will take care of her when you're gone? Her mother, worn thin by worry and rheumatism, began to look at Clara with something close to fear. Clara kept working. She took in sewing, sold eggs, cleaned houses for those who could pay. She read books borrowed from the traveling library that came once-a-month-old novels with cracked spines, histories of places she would never see. At night she sat by the fire with her mother, mending clothes in silence. Sometimes her mother would ask, voice trembling, "What is it you're waiting for, child?" Clara never answered. She didn't know how to explain the hollow feeling that came when she imagined tying her life to any of the men who asked. It wasn't dislike. It was simply that none of them saw her. They saw strong hands, a steady disposition, someone to cook and clean and bear children who would work the mines or the farms. They did not see Clara. By 27, the proposals stopped entirely. The men had married others. The younger ones looked past her now, as if she were already an old maid. Children called her Miss Hensley with careful politeness. In church, she sat alone in the pew her family had occupied for generations. The whispers grew crueler, cold, unnatural, touched in the head. Some said she had turned the men away because she carried a secret shame. Others claimed she practiced witchery in the woods, though no one had ever seen her do anything stranger than gather herbs for her mother's aching joints. Clara's mother died the winter she turned 30. Pneumonia took her quickly, leaving Clara truly alone in the little house. She buried her beside her father, stood in the snow until her feet went numb, then went home and made coffee as if nothing had changed. The house felt larger without her mother's soft breathing at night. Clara kept the garden, kept the cow, kept the silence. She spoke to neighbors only when necessary. People began to cross the road when they saw her coming, as if loneliness itself might be catching. Years passed like that. The mines closed one by one as the coal thinned. Men left for factory work in Ohio, taking their families with them. The village grew smaller, quieter. Clara's hair began to show threads of gray, though she was only 38. Her hands grew rough from work, her back ached in the mornings. She still read by lamplight, still walked the ridges alone, gathering blackberries or just watching the hawks circle high above. She had made peace with her solitude, or so she told herself. The ache was there, but it had become familiar, like an old injury that flared in bad weather. In the summer of 1965, when Clara was 41, a stranger came to Eldridge Hollow. His name was Daniel Morrow, and he arrived on foot, carrying a worn canvas pack and a limp that spoke of some old wound. He was tall, thin, with hair going gray at the temples and eyes that seemed to carry their own shadows. No one knew where he came from. He rented the abandoned Carver Place up on the North Ridge, an old cabin no one had lived in for 20 years, and set about fixing it with his own hands. He spoke little, paid for supplies in cash, and kept to himself. People watched him the way they watched anything new, with suspicion. He didn't attend church. He didn't drink at the store on Saturday nights. He worked from dawn to dusk, clearing brush, patching the roof, planting a small garden. Sometimes he disappeared into the woods for days, returning with bundles of ginseng root or yellow root to sell in town. The older women warned their daughters to stay clear of him. A man that age alone, running from something, they said. But Daniel Morrow asked for nothing from anyone. Clara first saw him in late August, when she was picking blackberries along the old logging road that bordered his land. The berries were thick that year, heavy on the canes. She had filled half a bucket when she heard footsteps and looked up to see him standing at the edge of the clearing. He stopped when he saw her, as if surprised to find another person there. "Morning," he said quietly. Clara nodded, wiping sweat from her forehead. She waited for him to move on, but he didn't. "Berries look good this year," he said. "They are," she replied. Her voice sounded rusty from disuse. He glanced at her bucket, then at the thicket behind her. "Mind if I pick a few? Haven't had fresh blackberries in years." Clara hesitated, then stepped aside. "Plenty for both." They picked in silence for a while, the only sounds the hum of insects and the occasional rustle of leaves. Daniel worked carefully, avoiding the thorns. After a time he spoke again. "You live down in the hollow?" "Yes." "Been here long?" "All my life." He nodded as if that explained something. When his hands were full, he straightened and looked at her directly for the first time. His eyes were pale blue, faded like old denim. "I'm Daniel Morrow," he said. "Clara Hensley." He repeated her name softly, as if tasting it. Then he thanked her for the berries and walked back toward his cabin. Clara watched him go, noting the way he favored his left leg, the careful way he moved through the underbrush. They met again a week later at the store. He was buying nails and coffee. She was trading eggs for flour. He nodded to her, and she nodded back, nothing more. But over the next months, their paths crossed often enough that the nods became brief greetings. Then short conversations about the weather, the price of feed, whether the creek would freeze early this year. Daniel never asked the questions others did. Why she lived alone, why she had never married. He seemed to accept her solitude as naturally as his own. In return, Clara never asked where he had come from or why he walked with a limp. Some things in Eldridge Hollow were better left unspoken. Autumn came, then winter. Snow fell deep that year, closing the roads for weeks. Clara kept her fire burning, her cow fed, her paths shoveled. One February morning, the wind howling like something wounded, she heard a knock at her door. When she opened it, Daniel stood there, snow in his hair, carrying a bundle wrapped in burlap. "Brought you something," he said. His breath clouded in the cold. Clara stepped aside to let him in. He set the bundle on the table and unwrapped it. A side of venison, fresh killed and dressed. "Deer came down close to the cabin," he said. "Thought you might use it." She stared at the meat, then at him. No one had brought her anything in years. "Thank you," she said finally. He shrugged. "Seemed right."
He stayed long enough for a cup of coffee, sitting at her table while the wind rattled the windows. They spoke of small things, the hardness of the winter, how the old mines were filling with water. When he left, the house felt warmer somehow. After that, he came more often. Sometimes with meat or firewood he had split, sometimes just to sit and talk. Clara found herself looking forward to his visits, though she would not admit it even to herself. He told her about places he had seen, northern forests where the trees grew straight and tall, rivers wide enough to lose sight of the far bank. He never spoke of the years before he came to the hollow, and she never asked. Spring returned slowly, the snow melting into mud. Daniel's limp grew worse in the damp. Some days he could barely walk. Clara began leaving poultices of comfrey and willow bark on his doorstep when she passed. He left jars of wild honey in return. They fell into a rhythm as natural as the seasons. One evening in May, when the dogwoods were blooming white against the green hills, Daniel came to her door carrying nothing. He stood on the porch a long time before speaking. "Clara," he said at last, "I've been thinking." She waited. "I know I'm not much to look at. Older than you. Beat up. No land to speak of. But I've got steady hands and a strong back when the weather's kind. And I've got no one else." He paused, looking out over the hills rather than at her. "I wondered if you might consider keeping company with me. Not asking for marriage, not yet. Just company." Clara felt something shift inside her chest, like a stone finally settling into place after years of teetering. "I might consider that," she said. They began slowly. Walks along the ridge at dusk. Sitting on her porch while the whippoorwills called, Daniel fixed the leaking roof on her house without being asked. Clara cooked supper sometimes, simple meals of cornbread and beans and whatever grew in the garden. They spoke of many things, but never of the past that weighed on them both. In July, Daniel told her. They were sitting by the creek, watching the water slide over smooth stones. He spoke quietly, without looking at her. "I was married once," he said. "Long time ago. In Virginia. She died having our son. The boy lived 3 days." He picked up a pebble and skipped it across the water. "After that, I couldn't stay. Worked the lumber camps up north, then the war came. Korea. Took shrapnel in the leg. Spent a year in hospitals. When I got out, I just kept moving. Didn't think I'd ever stop." Clara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she reached over and covered his hand with hers. That was all. A week later, she told him her own story. Not the refusals that he had heard from others, but the deeper truth. How she had watched her mother grow old before her time, tied to a man who loved her but could not save her from hardship. How she had seen girls she grew up with married at 17, pregnant at 18, worn out by 30. How the thought of giving herself to that life had felt like stepping into a grave while still breathing. "I didn't want to be saved," she said. "I wanted to be seen." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "I see you, Clara." They were married in September, in the side yard of her house with only the preacher and 2 neighbors as witnesses. Clara wore her mother's Sunday dress, faded but clean. Daniel wore the only suit he owned, patched at the elbows. There was no celebration afterward, just a quiet meal shared with the few who came. The village talked, of course. Some said she had finally come to her senses. Others said the stranger had bewitched her. A few simply shrugged and said it was about time someone took her in. But Clara and Daniel paid no mind. They lived sometimes in her house, sometimes in his cabin, moving between them as the seasons changed. Daniel's leg improved with Clara's herbs and the warmer weather. Together they kept a larger garden, preserved food for winter, cut firewood enough for both homes. In the evenings they read aloud to each other. Daniel had a deep, steady voice that made even the simplest stories beautiful. Years passed. The village continued to empty as young people left for cities. The school closed, then the store. Clara's hair turned fully gray. Daniel's limp returned in cold weather. They grew old together in the way they had lived, quietly, steadily, with small kindnesses that added up to something large. In the spring of 1989, Daniel's heart began to fail. He spent more time sitting on the porch, watching the hills turn green. Clara cared for him with the same patience she had always shown herself. One morning in early June, he woke and asked her to help him outside. They sat together in the sunlight, his hand in hers. "I never thought I'd have this," he said. "Peace. Someone who knows me." Clara pressed his fingers gently. "Nor I." He died 3 days later, in his sleep, with Clara beside him. She buried him on the ridge above his cabin, where he had loved to watch the sun set. The preacher came again, and a handful of the old neighbors. Afterward, Clara went home alone. She lived another 12 years, kept the garden, kept the houses, walked the ridges until her legs would no longer carry her far. In her final winter, when she was 81, she grew weak and took to her bed. The neighbor's daughter, now grown with children of her own, came daily to check on her. One evening, as snow fell soft and silent outside the window, Clara looked at the young woman and smiled. "Tell them," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "that I was never waiting for a man to save me. I was waiting for one who wouldn't ask me to disappear." She died that night, peacefully, with the fire burning low. The houses stood empty after that. The gardens went wild. But on the ridge, 2 graves lay side by side, one marked with a simple stone for Daniel Morrow, the other for Clara Hensley Morrow, the dates carved clear and close together. People passing through the hollow years later, what few there were, sometimes stopped to look. They spoke of the woman every man refused to marry, and the stranger who finally did. But the truth was quieter, deeper, and entirely their own. In the end, Clara had not been saved from solitude. She had chosen it, fiercely, until someone arrived who understood that solitude was not the same as emptiness. And in choosing each other, late and without ceremony, they had built something the village could never quite name, a life measured not in children or land or legacy, but in the rare and stubborn grace of being truly seen.